Yeah, that was
Where we left off yesterday,
I don't know how.
we talked about, we looked at this cross section of a leaf. So again, this is like if you had a leaf, you're just looking into it and it's obviously magnified. These are kind of the layers you would see. And we'll talk a little bit about what these different layers do. So the top and the bottom, there's this cuticle. It's waxy. It basically seals the leaf. Because there's, obviously plants need a lot of water. If they don't have water, they will and eventually die. And so this waxy layer that covers the leaf prevents water from evaporating from the interior of the leaf. And then there's the thin layer of cells that we call the epidermis, kind of like the skin of a leaf. We have these packed together cells. That's called the palisade layer. This is where a lot of photosynthesis is going on. You could see in these cells, there's lots of green chloroplasts because light can travel through the epidermis and the cuticle, hit those chloroplasts, and then photosynthesis can take place. Also, running through the leaf and through the stems and the woody parts of plants, there's also what we call vascular tissue. So we have blood vessels that carry blood around our body, arteries, veins, capillaries. Well, plants actually have their own tubes that carry materials around the plant. So when a plant absorbs water through its roots, somehow that water needs to get to the leaves and other parts of the plant. It does that by going through these tubes. The leaves make sugars through photosynthesis, but that energy, those nutrients need to get to other parts of the plant. So they need to be transmitted through these tubes as well. So the two types of vascular tissues we have in plants are called the phloem, xylem, and the phloem. The phloem is the one that carries sugars, and the xylem is the one that mostly carries water. Below this palisade layer is a spongy layer where there's many more air spaces. You can see it a little more clearly in this. This is the spongy layer where there's all these large gaps that are filled with air. And that air is important because all of these cells, the chloroplasts, they need carbon dioxide in order to go through this process of photosynthesis. So because these air spaces are filled with air, they'll have that carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. And then finally, on the lower levels, at the bottom or sometimes on the top of the leaf are these little openings. They're called stomates. And their purpose is to allow for air to come into this space here. And you can see here's the opening. And sometimes those openings get sealed up. There's two cells on each side of the opening. They're called guard cells. And sometimes they close up and seal off those spaces. Other times they open. And they do that depending on the needs of the plant and depending on conditions. So typically what we would find is that during the daytime, those openings, those stoma, open up to allow gases to come in. Okay. But if the plant is losing water, if the plant is in very dry conditions, then they may close up to seal that off, because even though that when it's open, carbon dioxide and air can get in, but also water can get out. So it is possible that a plant would lose too much water when that stoma is open. So it closes it up accordingly. And we can see these are actual microscope images. So here we see two guard cells, one on each side. See the opening in the middle, that's open. And then on this one, it's closed. Okay, it's sealed up. So those guard cells and stoma are really important for how the plant functions. So if we think about photosynthesis, it's probably all information you've already learned before. What you need to know in living environment is the basics. You don't have to worry about the light reactions and the light independent reactions, but you should know the general equation. So in photosynthesis, we have CO2, which is what? What is CO2? Symbol for carbon dioxide. We have H2O, which is water. So carbon dioxide plus water. The arrow means it yields or produces C6H12O6. Anyone know what that is? C6H12O6 is the chemical formula for glucose. That's glucose, the sugar. And it also produces oxygen, O2. Why are there these sixes here? Anyone know?
It's making 6 oxygen.
It is, and this is what we call a balanced equation. Probably in 7th grade, you may have learned that just CO2 plus H2O produces glucose and oxygen. Well, when you're in chemistry, which probably a lot of you will take next year, we have to write balanced equations. And so we have to have the same number of carbons, oxygen, and hydrogens on each side of the equation, and that's what that's showing. So that's the overall general equation for photosynthesis. It also needs chlorophyll, which is usually found in the chloroplast, as you've already talked about in cells. It needs certain enzymes, and it needs light. Okay? Light is necessary. It can be artificial light, it can be natural light, but it needs light as a source of energy for this reaction. Don't worry about the differences between the two reactions. So there's some things that affect photosynthesis, factors that affect it. One is carbon dioxide. We can see that graph here. If you have no carbon dioxide, obviously you can't have any photosynthesis. That's one of the ingredients, one of the raw materials needed. As carbon dioxide levels increase, the rate of photosynthesis increases up to a certain point. At a certain point, adding more carbon dioxide doesn't increase photosynthesis anymore. The amount of light is also important. Obviously, with no light, you have no photosynthesis. If you increase the intensity of the light, you increase photosynthesis up to a point. And temperature. Temperature is also important. You can see here, photosynthesis works best at sort of a moderate temperature. If it's too low, photosynthesis rate is low. If it's too high, the photosynthesis rate is low. There are optimum temperatures depending on the plant. So photosynthesis, carbon dioxide comes into the chloroplast. Water is required. And energy transforms those materials into glucose and oxygen. Those are what's produced. The glucose is what the plant uses for its food, uses for energy. It's why plants don't have to eat anything. They're making their own glucose in this process of photosynthesis. Okay, well, what about respiration then? Respiration also involves energy. So photosynthesis requires energy. It transforms energy from sunlight to glucose. Respiration is a process that takes energy in glucose and turns it into a more usable form. It turns it into a molecule that's extremely important for cells called ATP. ATP is what the cell uses for energy. It's another biochemical process that takes place. Happens in the mitochondria of cells. This is what glucose looks like, little model of glucose molecule. This is what ATP looks like. And so respiration takes place by taking that glucose and kind of breaking it down over a series of reactions and using the energy and storing it in this molecule called ATP. ATP is what cells run on. It's what they use to do all of their activities. There's really two types of respiration. One of them uses oxygen. It's called aerobic respiration. And the other type is anaerobic respiration, which is what happens when there's no oxygen available, or certain organisms only perform anaerobic respiration. Humans use anaerobic respiration to produce lots of products. Fermentation is anaerobic respiration. Certain types of cheese, like Swiss cheese, is made through fermentation because certain bacteria are producing carbon dioxide in the culture, and that's what produces the holes in Swiss cheese. Things like yogurt, soy sauce are fermented products that the bacteria that are mixed with them go through this process of anaerobic respiration. Wine, beer, alcohol is produced by the action of yeast, which go through anaerobic respiration, vinegars and so forth. But we're mostly concerned with aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the kind that does use oxygen. You guys are on the wrong slide. Oh, did I mess? Oh, I changed these slides. We'll go on to the next page. Like you. Go again. Yeah, we're on aerobic, not anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration needs oxygen, and it produces ATP. Here's the formula for it. C6H12O6, which we now know is glucose, plus oxygen, produces three things: ATP, water, and oxygen. So respiration is happening in our body all the time, in the mitochondria of our cells. As we eat different things, they get broken down into glucose, which gets transported in our bloodstream to all of our cells. And then in the mitochondria of our cells, that glucose is broken down by this process in the mitochondria. Oxygen and glucose are used to produce ATP, which is the energy we need, plus some byproducts, water and oxygen.